Agora sim.
Yeah, this, now it's right.
Good evening, everyone. With a great pleasure, we'll be here once again with this wonderful topic tonight, the pioneers of Spiritist teachings that Charles Kempf will present for us. And I invite Charles and Silvia. Greetings you all. Welcome, my dear friends.
Ladies first.
Oh,
Silvia?
hello, good evening, everyone. Boa tarde a todos. Sempre um prazer estar aqui com todos nós. E always a pleasure to be here together for one more study of the week. Today we're going to talk about the pioneers of the Spiritist teachings, which is very important for us to know the history behind it. And Charles will give us, I am sure, a very thorough lecture on this. So it's always a pleasure to be here, and may God bless us all. Boa tarde, então, a todos. Hoje vai ser muito interessante o estudo sobre os pioneiros dos ensinamentos espíritas, que o Charles vai trazer para nós, e vai ser muito bom. Muito interessante, e é um estudo extremamente importante para nós, que somos espíritas, conhecer a história do nosso movimento. Então, boa tarde a todos e que Deus nos abençoe.
Bonjour, bonsoir à tous. Très heureux d'être à nouveau parmi vous ce soir, cette fois-ci pour parler des pionniers, des enseignements spirites. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Very happy to be here again with you today to share a little bit some thoughts about the pioneers of the Spiritist teachings. It's a holiday period, so we are missing Stevan, which is traveling on holiday, and some other persons as well. But still, we, Elsa and Silvia and myself, are here to continue this spiritual light without interruption.
Especially with this topic today, no? Tonight. It will be wonderful. I think if you be patient, I can try to share a short video. I hope that I can do it. Okay, just a minute.
Spiritism is a new science that has come to reveal to humans, by means of irrefutable proofs, the existence and nature of the spirit world and its relations with the corporeal world. It shows us that world no longer as something supernatural, but instead as one of the living and incessantly active forces of nature, as the source of a multitude of phenomena hitherto incomprehensible, and for that reason relegated to the domain of the fantastic and extraordinary. It is to such relations that Christ alludes on several occasions, and that is why many things that he said have remained unintelligible or wrongly interpreted. Spiritism is the key that enables everything to be easily explained. The law of the Old Testament is personified in Moses. That of the New Testament is personified in Christ. Spiritism is the third revelation of God's law, but it is not personified in any particular individual. Rather, it is the product of a teaching given not by one person, but by the spirits, who are the voices of heaven, at all points of the earth, and through a countless multitude of intermediaries. It is a sort of collective being entailing a group of beings from the spirit world, each one coming to bring to humans the tribute of its knowledge in order to enable them to know about that world and the fate that awaits them in it. In the same way that Christ said, "I have not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it," Spiritism says, "I have not come to destroy the Christian law, but to fulfill it." It teaches nothing contrary to what Christ taught, but develops, completes, and explains in clear terms for everybody what he stated only in allegorical form. Spiritism has come to fulfill at the foretold time what Christ announced and to prepare the fulfillment of future things. It is therefore the work of Christ, who himself is presiding, as he also announced, over the regeneration that is occurring. and who is preparing the reign of the kingdom of God on earth.
So we are here once again. So I've removed this one. And now, Charles, can I add your slides?
Yes, please. So I will make it rather short in order to have maybe more times also for Elsa and Silvia to complement or to comment, or also to the followers which are already connected, Camille, Beatrice, Tiago, Maria, and Nancy. Maybe to raise questions about these pioneers of Spiritism and spiritualism. As a precursor, before we really talked about spiritualism, we had Emmanuel Swedenborg. In Swedenborg, you can see the dates here, it was in the 17th and 18th century. He was a Swedish person who had some mediumistic faculties. And one of the most known phenomenon that occurred with him was he was in Göteborg and managed to an out-of-body experience. And through it, he could see a fire which was at that same moment happening in Stockholm, and could describe to the person which were around him at that moment in Göteborg details about this fire and the point where the fire stopped, for instance. And of course, at that time, there was no telecommunication as of today. They had to wait a couple of days until the information really came, and which was confirming the moment and the details that Emmanuel Swedenborg told to those persons present. So he later on also developed a full theology even, which is quite complex. There are still some followers of Swedenborg today, but he really, through this mediumistic phenomenon, shaped a little bit, or let's say introduced this subject to the current of thoughts at that time. Okay. Then after him came Franz Anton Mesmer. Let me see if I can change the slide. Yes. So this was end of the 18th and first half of the 19th centuries. So Franz Anton Mesmer, which was an Austrian doctor, physician, he came to Paris because he was, how to say it, sent out of Austria because of his ideas he was spreading about magnetism and universal fluid, and came to Paris in 1778 until 1789, and where he could teach more freely his principles and findings about the mesmerism. Okay, so it's animal magnetism, universal fluids, and there was also two currents in the mesmerism. Some current was spiritualist, so admitting that behind this magnetism phenomenon, there were the reality of the spirit and intervention of spirit in some cases, and another school which was more materialistic, saying that everything is a question of fluids coming from the physical body and so on. So that was also an eye opener somehow to this question of spiritualism. Okay, because clearly some person who fell into somnambulism state, they could see, hear, and transmit communication from spirits of persons which passed away already. So that was clearly showing or feeding, I would say, this spiritualist current. Okay. Then it was the Fox Sister phenomenon in Heidesville, New York, in 1848. This famous raps or poltergeist that happened in the Fox Sister house, and where a lot of people came to investigate and could not find any material cause to the phenomenon. And there was a huge debate, some polemics even about the subject, with some serious scientists starting serious studies already at that time, but also a lot of journalistic, mediatic exaggeration, and also, of course, religious opposition, talking about devil and so on around it. Okay, so this phenomenon is admitted as being the, let's say, the trigger date, the starting date of the modern spiritualist trend, 1848. Okay, in Heidesville, New York, US. And then this phenomenon got diversified a little bit in the other ones that we called turning and talking tables, which was a kind of a fashion in Europe. It was the how to say, the people. There was no internet, no TV, nothing at that time, of course. And in the 1850s, the main occupation in the saloons in Paris, was to promote the exotic phenomenon like turning tables, and in order to gather more people accepting to be invited and participating to the meetings in the salon and to these experiences. So this spread not only in France but over the whole world in the 1850s, basically. Okay. And there, the hypothesis of possibility of communication of spirits got more stronger, and there was a huge public attention. The scientific were skeptic. The Catholic Church told about the devil works now, and the spiritualist Mesmerist clearly admitted the spiritual hypothesis or paradigm. Okay. Then, from 1855, a French teacher, Hippolyte Léon de Desarivailles, who later on adopted the pseudonym of Allan Kardec, started his more serious investigations, 1855. In 1857, he wrote the Spirits book, which was the first milestone, I would say, from the Spiritism. Spiritism, the word in French, has been used the first time in the Spirits book in 1857. It existed already a couple of years earlier in the English language, but with a slightly different meaning. So the word Spiritism, at least in French, is a neologism that was defined by Allan Kardec. And you could see then that between 1857 and his death in 1869, he had the time to write the five core books of the Spiritist teachings. As you know already, we commented it in previous lives. Spirit's book, the Medium's book, the Gospel according to Spiritism. You saw some quotes in the video just before. Heaven and Hell, 1865, and the last one was Genesis, 1868. On top of some smaller books like What is Spiritism or Spiritism in its simplest expression, and also the Spiritist magazine, who was published every month between January 1858 and his death, April 1869. Okay. So he had some contact with somnambudism and mesmerism before investigating and creating the Spiritism. He became quite strongly convinced about the spirit hypothesis. So he was really developing this spiritualist paradigm. He was also describing the key roles of medium. He did not only stay to the phenomenon itself, but he was drawing all the philosophical and ethical consequences of it. Yes, we have a soul. Aha, okay. And so what? Where does the soul come from? It existed before the birth. Okay, so it is reincarnating. Yes, what happens when we die? The spirit is getting free from the physical body. And then after a certain period, it comes and reincarnates again, and so on. And then, okay, what is the spirit when he goes to the spiritual world, depending on what he did in the material world? And a lot of spirits telling their stories, showing that basically the law of evolution, and if we follow the moral and ethical principles of nature, this is the key to the happiness of the spirits. And on another hand, too strong attachment to the material things and doing bads is making the situation of the spirit most complicated. So Kardec really entered in the ethical and philosophical consequences of the existence, survival, and reincarnation of the soul, and the communicability between the souls and and us, the incarnated humans. Okay, and then of course. This book had quite some success. There was a lot of Spiritist group in France, but not only, all around the world. He had correspondence in Brazil even. He had correspondence throughout Europe, everywhere. I mean, these ideas were really spread around, and it was quite a favorable time for this. So this is when then Spiritism was born, through this Kardec codification. And today I still say and repeat, it's a revolution, a revolutionary concept that is today still not understood to its full extent. This spiritualist paradigm showing that the law of natures are also including and covering a spiritual world that we cannot see or perceive in the normal state, but which is nevertheless existing and permanently interacting with the material world. Okay. After Kardec's death, it was a little bit more complicated in France. Political climate was difficult. There was a war against the Prussians that the Emperor Napoleon III lost. And then there was the Third Republic and a repressive system, less tolerance, and so on. And also there was a follower, which was Pierre Gaëtan Lemarie, who shifted the Spiritism back to almost exclusively scientific aspect, and who also published some pictures from Bugey, spirits that were then later on found out to be fake. So he was in prison during 1 year, and Spiritism lost a lot of credibility in France because of all these mistakes that Pierre Gaëtan Lemarie and some other followers did in that period, mostly in the 1870s. Okay. Then talking also a little bit about other countries. So one of the most known pioneers in UK was William Crooks. You can see the dates. He was also a scientist in physics. He discovered the thallium element, and he also invented the Crooks tube. This tube where putting under vacuum and putting also an anode and a cathode, we can observe some electrons traveling through the tube. So it is the start of the X-rays and also of the cathodic tubes that we know in the former TVs. Today it's not used anymore. So all this is due to William Crookes. And he was also asked by the Royal Society of UK to investigate this phenomenon and to demonstrate if they are true or false, or let's say to make the light on it and look if it's true or fake. And William Crookes, after observing the phenomenon, came to the conclusion, like the Americans came some years earlier by observing the Fox sister phenomenon, that these phenomena are authentical, and that there is really something behind, for which the best explanation still is that the spirit is surviving after the death, and able to communicate with humans, keeping its individuality. And you can see on the right side the pictures of William Crooks with Katie King, which is a spirit which is materialized through the ectoplasmic phenomenon created by the medium that you can see on the end right pictures, which was Florence Cook. So he was really doing a lot of serious examinations, which had a huge impact at that time. Even so, if later on he was heavily criticized, they told even that he denied later on his previous statements, which he denied again. No, I have nothing to deny. I can even confirm and add much more things to what I said in the past. So, and then came some other critics about methodology or some sentimental relationship with the mediums or stuff like that. But it's very easy later on to try to put some dirt on a person. Nevertheless, William Crooks is still very well known by this investigation he made and the book he wrote about this materialization phenomenon of Katie King. Okay. Another one, which is Daniel Dunglass Home. So he was a medium, I think Irish, if I don't know, Scottish
Scottish.
or Irish. Help me, Silvia.
Scottish.
Scottish, yes, sorry. So his dates you can see here. And he had also some mediumistic facilities of physical effects. He managed to create phenomena of levitation, including of himself with a chair and everything, also of materialization of some instruments, and so on. And he was then traveling around Europe, even a little bit before Kardek, in the 1850s. He came to France and was invited by the court of Napoleon III and Josephine, his wife, in order to have a session. And one of these sessions, Allan Kardec could also observe. So Dunglass Home is still very well known by the books he wrote and also these phenomena he managed to create. Another one, which is Alfred Russel Wallace's, so he was working with Charles Darwin, but he departed quite quickly from the Darwin theory, which was exclusively materialistic, did not contemplate, encompass at all the spiritual world, whilst Russel Wallace entered stronger in this spiritualist hypothesis, and which are better explaining the theory of evolution. Darwin observed the material aspect of it, and Russel Wallace somehow added the spiritual vision of them. And one of the books, which is quite known, he wrote was on Miracles and Modern Spiritualism. William Staton Moses, also, he was a medium. He wrote several books, including this one that you can see here, Psychography, a treatise in one of the objective sum of psychic or spiritual phenomenon. And he really developed a lot the mediumship practice in UK. He promoted a lot these communications between the spiritual and the material world. Oliver Lodge, sorry, he also he got spiritualist quite quickly and wrote two very well-known books, Survival of Man, 1909, about the hypothesis of the survival of the spirits to what we call death, and a second one, which he wrote in 1960, Raymond or Life and Death, because his son, which was called Raymond, died during the First World War, and his spirit came to communicate, communication reaching Oliver Lodge, and bringing a lot of details and information absolutely confidential that were not known by the mediums and only known by him and by Oliver Lodge himself, giving in this way a lot of proofs of the survival of his individuality. And Oliver Lodge wrote then a whole book on this, which you can see the title here in 1916. And that was really very strong because in the First World War, a lot of young people died during this war, something like 4 to 5 million dead. And a lot of parents then entered in this type of questioning. Is it surviving and so on? And this book of Oliver Lodge had a huge impact at that difficult time. Okay. In France, again, we have two main pioneers, which is Léon Denis. Léon Denis that we had, and with the bus also had the whole year last year, the commemoration, because it was 90, no, let me think. It was the anniversary of his birth, 1846, and we made a lot of divulgation and studies and presentation about his books. He was really one of the most, how to say it, the one who best understood and commented and developed and contextualized in his time 50 years later, the writings of Allan Kardec. He's really one of the best philosophers of the Spiritist teachings in France, and wrote also several books in which he developed a lot the Spiritist view, and also gave thousands, no, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of conferences in France and Europe. And his conferences were really very, very strong. He was a big inspiration during the conferences, and it was when he went somewhere, it was an immediate success. All the rooms were full of people who wanted to listen to him, and we could see a lot of positive comments in the papers or in the magazine from those epochs. And another one is Gabriel De Land, that you can see the pictures on the right side. So he was an engineer from the École Centrale Manufacture, École Centrale in Paris. And he developed a lot the scientific aspect of Spiritism, but not exclusively. So he stayed really Spiritist with all the ethical and moral and philosophical consequences as Kardec, but had a very strong action in the scientific area, and wrote also a lot of books about several books about Spiritism, participated to some societies for psychical researchers that were a lot at that time, and was also one of the main, most known Spiritist follower of Allan Kardec in France. And Léon Denis died in 1927. Gabriel De Land died in 1926. And by the way, Camil Flammarion, that I will talk a little bit also later, died in 1925. So we had really the three main followers of Kardec who died in 3 years in the period between the two world wars. And in France, the Spiritism was quite strong until that period. And then, of course, it lost a little bit momentum before growing up again after the 80s, 1980s. Okay. And today also continuing in a continuous development and increasing. And mostly thanks to Kardec and to these two apostles. In between the 1880s and the 1930s, there was really a big development of psychical researchers. Of course, there was the Royal Society in London, William Crooks, but then the Society for Psychical Research in London. And only in France there were something like 15 different societies in Paris, but also in a lot of other cities in France, which were promoting the investigations of the Spiritist phenomenon. So turning table, materialization, and so on, ectoplasm, and so on. And here there are also some names in this area. So William Crooks, so he was Nobel Prize in medicine, and William Crookes not. I talked about already. Charles Richet. Charles Richet got the Nobel Prize as French physiologist. He was never, until just before he died, convinced about the spiritualist hypothesis, albeit he always admitted that there are strong evidences. And he published, for instance, Traité de métapsychique, a very thick book, which is a complete compendium about the different type of phenomenon. He is also the creator of the word ectoplasm, and had a huge actuation in all these scientific researches. Camil Flammarion, so I talked a little bit about him already, I mentioned him. He very young participated with 18 years in 1860. He participated to the society, the French Society of Spiritist Studies, which was led by Allan Kardek. So he knew Kardek for several years. He later on got a French, famous French astronomer. And his last books before he died in 1927, so all the books he published at the beginning of the 19th century were really deeply and strongly following the spiritualist paradigm. And the last one is Gustav Gerle, that I mentioned here. He also was a French physician, researcher, and spiritist. He died in 1924. He was in a plane from a congress in Varsovia about psychical researchers, and his plane crashed just after taking off, and that is how he died. He also was a leader of the Institut Métapsychique International, so International Metapsychical Institute in Paris, which is still existing today. So he was the first the director of this institute. So there were a lot of investigation, but it was always very difficult to control them. And even after the Second World War and more recently, there are less and less medium who accept to submit to these very drastic conditions, which are of course difficult for the medium itself, for the person, but also in sometimes making the phenomenon impossible to occur. And of course, there was a lot of fraud, there was money involved, and so on. There was a lot of problem, but still, some of the phenomenon were recognized, and even today recognized as being authentical and without other explanation. Okay. Here you can see some pictures of the investigation of Gustav Gerle with the medium Eva Carrère getting these materializations. And also he studied another Polish medium which was called Franek Kluski, where he managed to get a hand which was materialized, plunged into paraffin, and then taking out and then unmaterializing, leaving the piece of paraffin, to which we can cast gypsum in order to reproduce the hand which was materialized. So he made it in with some technical conditions and precautions which were quite strong, and at that time it was of course recognized as being impossible to make a fake, or to remove the hand from this paraffin envelope without on another way than by unmaterializing the hand. Okay, and these gypsum castings are still available today in the Institut Metapsychique in Paris. And if you visit it there, or if you go to an expo in Paris, you can see them. It is possible to see them. Okay. So that was Gustav Gerle. And then let's talk a little bit to finish about Brazil. In Brazil, there were also in the 19th century two schools, the scientific school, and in Brazil it was called, and is still today called, the religious school. So in Brazil, at the opposite, it's something a little bit characteristic from Brazil that is not existing so much elsewhere. The Spiritism became a kind of a religion. Okay. There are several reasons for that. First, because Brazil, even being a Catholic country, the Catholic religion, as practiced in Brazil, was always quite free and independent from Vatican, at the opposite of what is occurring in Europe. So in Europe, it's a devil, don't touch to these things, and so on. Whilst in Brazil, there was more freedom for even Catholic followers to follow also some Spiritist groups. And on another hand, in Brazil, there were big necessities in terms of social assistance, and the Spiritism movement and groups developed a lot in that area. And last but not least, there were also some very strong pioneers like Sheikh Chavier. He was a medium between 1910 and died in 2002. And he was really, I call him still today, the best example of medium, okay? And the best example also of mediumship practice, because he kept always this disinterest. He was always disinterested, never to made any money out of it, at the opposite of the other, like Zapia Palladino and all these, which were paid for producing this phenomenon for the societies for psychical researchers. No, Chico never got one penny, even when he had some difficulties. His father, for instance, not enough money to take some medicines for his illness. He never accepted to get any retribution for the mediumistic phenomenon or the books he received by psychography, because that was the mediumship type for which he was most known. Okay, and he also is unanimously recognized his mediumship faculty. He wrote books of poetry, for instance, of very famous Portuguese and Brazilian poets with very, very different styles. And all the specialists who examined this mediumistic book recognized strongly the characteristic of the styles, and were also unanimously admitting that one man with a poor education can very difficult to have him imitating so many different styles in poetry. Okay, so he wrote more than 400 books over his whole life, received thousands and thousands and thousands of people consoling, wrote a lot of letters also with proof of identity of deceased person in some families that he ignored totally all the details. So in terms of mediumship, he gave a push of the Spiritist movement in Brazil, and he is even recognized as being a good man by people which are not Spiritist, in the point that he was designed as the biggest Brazilian of all the times, in front of Pelé, of Santos Dumont, of a lot of other Brazilian well-known persons. So the one who got the designation was Sheikh Chavier. Okay. But in Brazil, there were also a lot of others, like Caio Parchuto, who developed, who was interior of the state of São Paulo, published Revista Internacional de Spiritismo, which is still existing today, so almost 1 century later. And he also disseminated a lot of Spiritism in Brazil, founded a lot of groups. Euripides Barzanulfo, who was also an extraordinary medium who could make out-of-body experience, he was a teacher, be in front of his students, of course, in a kind of a trance state, and materializing some 10 or 20 kilometers away from there in order to help, for instance, a pregnant woman to get his baby, or to help some other persons. But in a way that the person which were distant were absolutely convinced he was physically there, whilst he wasn't. So that was also very well medium who participated a lot to the development of Spiritism in Brazil. And also Ivon Pereira, who wrote also some very good books in Brazil as a medium. And last but not least, is Divaldo Franco, which is born in 1827, which is still, 1927, sorry, which is still alive amongst us, with then 95 years old right now. Of course, a couple of, not so long, 2, 3, 4 years ago, before COVID, for instance, he still was traveling around Europe and the world to give his lectures, which was also very success. He founded in Brazil Mansão do Caminho in Salvador, which is helping several thousand of people every day, children to get education, school, pregnant women to get their babies, and also poor people to get some food or even some money. So it's a huge social assistance work he founded together with his colleague. And he's also a very exemplary medium. He also wrote something like 400 books. And in Paris, you see the picture here in the middle, when we had in 2004 the Congress commemorating the 200 years of birth of Allan Kardec. He got, by a psychography, a message which was written in a specular way, means back from, not in the right way, but in the opposite way. So you need to look the message in a mirror or to flip it on a computer in order to be able to read it. And it was written directly in French. And Divaldo, he understands some words of French, but not to the point to write a full message. So it's another example of his mediumistic faculty, where he got a message of Léon Denis, Spirit, homenageing Allan Kardec for this anniversary. Okay. And he also, as I told, was an unrivaled speaker. And he, yes, made more than thousands of conferences in a lot of different countries around the world. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you today. And now let's open the field for Elsa or Silvia if you want to complement something, or maybe also to answer to some questions of the participants. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Wonderful, wonderful, Charles. We were in need of a talk like that in English. So now I know that our people are enjoying so much. Friends from Cyprus, from other places, Malta, Brazil, United States, and Portugal, they are here. And we have 2 or 3 comments here and 1 question. I can show to you, or you can read here, besides, where it says the question from Camil. I wanted to know, it's not so relevant. I wanted to know how many Spiritists in France at the moment.
It's a good question. Kardec in 1869 made a statistics where he was estimating something like 600,000 to 700,000 Spiritists in France. today it's more difficult to say for several reasons. I would say that Spiritist groups which are known, whether they are registered as a non-profit organization or only, let's say, familiar groups or unregistered groups, there are something like 100. But then what we can see in France, you have a lot of people which are Spiritists, which are disseminating, which are participating to some virtual forums, which are even helping us in some tasks, and so on. And much, much more than what we think. When I was looking to the statistics of book sellings in France, only the Spirits book is selling something like 5,000 prints every yearly, only the Spirits book. So when we look to this, we really can estimate that in France there are several thousands or even tens of thousands of Spiritists or people which are open to the Spiritist teachings. Okay, so we don't have a more accurate, detailed statistic about this. If we go worldwide, for instance, only in Brazil there are several millions, I think 3 millions or 4 millions of people who tell my religion is Spiritism. Even that Spiritism is not a religion. They say they answer to the question, what is your religion? They answer Spiritism, you see. And when you take all the people which are sympathetic to the Spiritist teachings, you have something like 20 to 30 millions. So we can estimate that around the world, and some other countries in Latin America like Cuba, Colombia, Argentina, there are a lot of Spiritists, and also the ones we have in Europe, that there are more or less 40 millions of Spiritism in the world right now. So 40 million is only 0.4% or whatsoever of the human population in the world. So it seems to be insignificant. But for instance, when you take the Jewish are 30 millions. So today there are more Spiritists already than Jewish in the world. So it's a small number, but yet it reached a significant amount. I think in Brazil and here in France as well, we have some difficulties to retain younger people. I would say mostly because we are not yet good in communicating with these young people. But there are some initiatives which are very promising in this area and hopefully bringing results, because when we talk about the soul and survival of souls and reincarnation to younger people, they are a lot of them are quite open to these ideas, more than some decades ago. So what we can see today is the number of Spiritists in the world is growing, yet slowly but surely.
Silvia, any comments or adding something?
Okay, a very thorough, as we knew it would be, talk, very informative, and it's always good to be reminded of a lot of things, isn't it? It's like William Crooks worked with Charlie Richet when they were doing research on that Italian lady Proserpina, and they both were not very happy. But it's very interesting. And I find it also in the beginning of the history of the pioneers, most of them were scientists, and they, like Oliver Lodge and Marie Curie was very interested as well. And so many people are very interested. And in the beginning, like De Land and Flammarion, they were astronomers and they were very scientific. The scientific world became extremely interested in spiritualism and spiritism. And I think the books, the Spirit's book and the work that Kardek did brought focus and really some of those people could understand and research from there, because the books were very scientific, and it's you very clearly and objective to read, and it's wonderful to have this. And also, so we can go back to the books and study them. Like Leon Denis, is his book, some of his books were seminal in explaining quite a lot of things in Spiritism. There is no substitute for going back to those, his books and reading it, and they learn as well. And of course, continue studying the basic books of Kardek. Just one point, Charles, I like to say, because somebody made a comment, in Brazil, because of the African beliefs as well. Yes, in some way helped. But at the beginning, the Catholic Church was extremely tough on Spiritists, to the point that you could not say you were a Spiritist, you could lose your job. I remember in the town where we were born, because my father used to go to the Spiritist Center, and I used to go with him when I was like 3 years old. It was at the end of the town, right at the very edge by the cemetery, which was really funny. And the meetings had to be really late at night, because the Catholic Church was very strong on that sit down. And they would not, so people would go almost like hidden, because openly they could not say. And I think there is this diversity in Brazil, which, thank God, now I think is changing, because you have a lot of people who are Catholics, and they also, you can see them in a church on a Sunday, and you would see them, in a Spiritist Center on the Friday. And I think because they were afraid, if they came out openly, it was very, very difficult. They could lose their jobs if they had families. There was all these difficulties. So it wasn't, although for the intelligentsia was something that came and really took hold, and also to Brazilian people, in lower echelons of society as well. But it wasn't without their struggle as well for Spiritism to be truly implemented. Thank God now people can say, I am a Spiritist. And I remember my cousin, my aunt, when her daughter went to school, and she put Spiritist as religion, and they didn't accept it. So she had to say she was a Catholic. And this was in the 60s. She was not allowed to say that she was a Spiritist as a religion. So, okay, then, let's put I'm a Catholic. And I think that's sometimes there is this confusion, because there were so many prejudices in many ways. A lot of people who are Spiritists would say they were Catholics, but now it's changing. And I think the number of, centers are opening up, and people are getting to know much more. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years, with having things in the internet, things have spread quite a lot. But then we have the responsibility to filter what we see in the internet as well, because not everything good. So I personally feel that we need to go to the books, all of us. It's very interesting. I mean, you have an informative talk like you did, which was wonderful. But I think we, as a rule, we really needed to go to the books. And that's exactly what the Spirits teach us anyway in Spirits book. You have to go, you have to read for yourself, to understand it for yourself. You don't understand today, tomorrow. And I find it very interesting, because I've read these books a few times, but every time I read it again, like we're studying them in the group that I coordinate, and I think, no, did I read this? It's completely new. It's like you're reading a new book every time you do it, because you're always learning something different, something new. So it's for a study for the whole life. And, I really suggest to everybody, go to the books, study the Spirit's book and the Medium's book, because it not only is a source of knowledge for life, but also makes you understand quite a lot of things why we're here, why we suffer, why we're doing things the way we were, and it's a chance to change, and of course continue reading the books as well. Sheikh Chavier has, I think now 539 books have been published, and the source of knowledge in some of those Sheikh Chavier books is unimaginable. We won't understand them for another 200 years, I would think. But it's the beginning. We can go back and you can learn. So I feel that Spiritism is something very, very important. And I think Kardek, or I think was Leon Denis, correct me if I'm wrong, he said something that Spiritism is not a religion of the future, but the future of all religion, or something like that.
Denis, yes.
Yeah, and I think that it is, because it's not also, I think, the question, how many people are there? It doesn't matter, because it's not a question of quantity of people, but the quality of the people who have become Spiritists. And I feel personally as well that once you are a Spiritist, it's a life transforming, it's a life changing. You will never be the same person again once you begin to understand just one thing, because it's so close to the teachings of Jesus and what he brought, to love one another. And that's exactly what Spiritism is the consoler that came to us. So I'm very enthusiastic. I can talk all night about it, but I will leave you so Elsa can have a word edgeways. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. Elsa, you are on mute.
So many things I have to see. Charles, could you explain quickly, or in your time, do you think Spiritism is missing out or on not being a religion, because we are not a religion? If you explain to Camil, and after that we go to our announcements. And
okay. No, really, the religions, when we take the word religion in French or in English, it has a lot of meanings, and even nobody really agrees. There is no consensus in all what this word means or doesn't mean. So it's a word which is complicated to use. It's not clearly defining. Some people will understand it as something positive, good, and so on. Some other people will understand it as being a superstition, something bad, anti-scientific, and so on. So this is why this word is not adequate to characterize Spiritism. And indeed, in order to illustrate, Kardek was clearly telling he never declared Spiritism as a religion because it would have been misunderstood. And we have exactly the same problem today. First, because in the traditional religions, there were so many difficult things committed, wars, the Inquisition, the hierarchical sacerdotal hierarchy, and this connivance with the governments and the kings and even dictators or whatever, and burning Joan of Arc and killing people because they are thinking different and so on. So it's quite loaded because of all these mistakes that have been committed along the time by the representative of these different religions. So what did Kardec do with the help of spirit at that time? He just took the good aspects of religion. What are the good aspects of religion? The morality, the ethics. Love one another. Do unto your neighbor what you would like your neighbor to do unto you. He took these positive aspects and rejected also the negative aspects like rituals and hierarchy, exclusivism, and so on. On another hand, he took the best part of science, which is the methodology, the positive methodology, but rejected also the negative parts of the science, which is atheism, materialism, sometimes excessive pride or things like that. And then he took this morality of the religion and the methodology of the science, and put them together for investigating the Spiritist phenomenon and doing the Spiritism. So Spiritism is really taking the best out of religion, the best out of science, for doing something new, something that if you take the Spiritism and put it back in the religion or in the science, you are somehow degrading it. I don't know if I'm expressing me clearly. So that's why when you present the Spiritism as a religion, maybe not in Poland or in some or Portugal or some countries, but in France or in Germany or wherever, the people, they say, no, I went out of my traditional religion to look for something else. So if Spiritism is another religion, I'm not interested in Spiritism. It's counterproductive. So present the Spiritism as a religion is really not the clearest and the best way to explain Spiritism, at least in Europe. Okay, so the Kardek explained it very well, and the reasons he gave for this explanation are still fully valid today. But again, in Brazil, it went well. Spiritism is admitted as being a religion, and it's going well. It was a success because we have 30 million of people which are sympathetic to the Spiritist teachings. Okay, so it's not a question to reject it or to criticize or whatever. It's just a question of understanding, of culture, of perception of the world itself as being positive, like in Brazil, or as being rather negative, as it is in France or some other countries here. So that's why Spiritism is again a revolution. It's something new out of the box, and that cannot be simply put back in the box without jeopardizing its nature.
Thank you very much, Charles. I think well explained. And we go to our announcements tonight after this wonderful presentation that you, Silvia, explained very well. And we have people here really participating. So now, my dear friends, for next week, be with us, 10th of August. Does Spiritism perform miracles? Can you think about? And be with us next week, okay? Same time, same day. Also, every fortnight, we have conversations on mediumship, time to talk, in our channel, YouTube channel, Bas Audiovisuals. We have our every Saturday, 10:30, the lessons course, the Medium's book. You can participate as well. The link is here, passcode. And also study of the book No Solar Astral City, every fortnight, Tuesday, same time as well. Be with us. And every Wednesday, 4 p.m., we have episodes, 15 minutes. Just a time that you have your coffee or your tea, have your break, and listen about the book Genesis, okay? And also, if you can, participate in Kardek group, giving donations to 2 charities in Brazil, North and South, and help this poor situation of these 2 ONGs, non-governmental institutions, okay, charities. So that's it. I think we are now saying thank you, Charles, thank you, Silvia, thank you all.
Merci.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Have a blessed week, everyone.
God
Bye.
Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Bye.